how you see God. And then talk about it. All right. Good morning. And welcome to our Wednesday morning class, coming to you from HeartLight Spiritual Center here in Charlotte. We want to welcome you that are here in the room. Thank you for coming out. We had a wonderful exercise class today with Michelle. Thank you. And we want to welcome you that might be joining us online, live, and you that will catch us later. So, I don't know where I am with the Gnostic thing. I don't feel that I'm through. I would like to do some more Nag Hammadi lost books, which are Gnostic in tone, but they're not Gnostic teaching, such as Mary Magdalene. I think we should really look at the book. There's actually a book called Mary Magdalene that was found in the 1940s. So she had her own book because she's the one that held the real secrets, not the men, but she was the one that Jesus told the deepest secrets to. So, of course, they made her into the prostitute. So we need to look at that and see why the image of women is either virgin or whore. Let me be blunt. Yes. That is the image in religion of women. You're either a Virgin Mary or you are a prostitute, a Mary Magdalene. So women did not get a good, healthy representation at all. And you have to go more into Egyptology to find some of them, because they did recognize the different goddesses, Isis and so on and so forth. Hathor represented a very healthy, sexual, sensual woman. Not bad, but just a woman who is sensual and in touch with her feelings and with her body. So we have to go outside of Christianity to find any healthy female archetypes at all, because you won't find it in Muslim, you will not find it even in the Jewish, although there's spurts of it in all of them, but they're not emphasized by any means, because it is definitely a man's world. And that is something I do want to talk about. I've skirted around it for months, but the Gnostics gave me a real challenge about how that the female seeks to become male. And I thought, whoa, that's not going to go good here, because they're all going to think man and woman. But if you get into the Gnostic teaching, you will understand why Adam was the first man, male and female, created he, them, and called their name Adam. And that the male represents the higher angels of ourself, and the feminine represents the body, and how that the body is trying to be raised to the higher angel. So all has a completely different spiritual application to it if we get our head out of men and women being everything to do with male and female. That's not the case in Gnosticism at all. So I'd sort of like to I'll go ahead and just play that lesson to you and let you listen to him, and then we'll have a discussion on it. But I know it's things are so politically charged, which really bothers me. I'm going to be honest with you. There's some things I would love to say, but I'm concerned to say it because it identifies me with one of the extremes, such as telling people to wake up and be woke. What's wrong with that? But now they've made it a political thing that means I'm some die-hearted liberal person that, is against whatever. And then the word progressive. I love progressive, but you can't say progressive because that puts you with the left of progressive. And so they're stealing words from us, so that there are gaps in our communication. Now, let me tell you this. A gap in communication is a blind spot in consciousness. I did a talk on this at the University of Metaphysics years ago as a speaker on blind spots of consciousness, and how that where there is a blind spot in consciousness, the ego fills with illusion. So it's the whole idea of being whole-brained and whole-minded is very important to fill in those blind spots in consciousness. So, and all that means is there is truth in us that has not been yet made conscious. So where it has not been made consciousness, there's a blind spot. And in that blind spot, the ego fills in with whatever its agenda is. It's like the serpent inserting its venom into the body or the brain of the person. And let me just say this about the serpent thing. Everybody thinks of a snake, and of course the picture of a snake wrapped around a tree and an apple and all that crazy stuff. But if you look up the word, I did research on the word serpent, and it was interesting, but it came from a word that meant enchanter or whisperer. It is a part of our own minds. Everybody has this, that there is a subtle whisper of something underneath that is subtle to us. What it boils down to, it was the ability to mesmerize or hypnotize the mind of the mankind that had been created to believe it was only a body and needed a spirit. So that's all I want to say about that. I don't want to get into it. So the serpent is the whisper of your subconscious, whispering to you an agenda to make things appear to be very separate from yourself. So it's not a real snake. It is the serpent of the mind. We might call it the limbic system. Because what? It wrapped itself around the tree. And your limbic is shaped as a tree with limbs and whatever around it. So be careful what suddenly comes in that begins to have an agenda of whispering to you, you're not worthy, you're not good enough, you're separate, you're this, you're that. And that's its agenda, is always to separate me off. See? And get me out of the circle of wholeness into the lie. Now, that isn't true always of Eastern teachings. Eastern teachings, for some reason, see the serpent energy as Kundalini and as something a little bit more spiritual than we do in the West. So there's many ways of looking at all these things. Before I start, I'm going to show a lesson today that I think would be very good for you, called the Gospel of Judas. But before we do that, let me say a few things. If all of this teaching that we're into right now is sort of making you and bringing you to a place of confusion, good. Confusion is a good stage to get into sometimes. Because the more of what you believed and thought that is not aligned with your innate intelligence system is what is diminishing in you. So old beliefs, old concepts, old precepts, and so on and so forth are beginning to be so questioned that they are beginning to become disassembled of themselves. It's coming apart. It's coming apart. And coming apart is a tremendously important part of transformation. Remember, I've said so many times this statement, I know people get tired of it, but the caterpillar does not go through what it goes through to become an enlightened caterpillar. No. And if it remained a caterpillar, but it went to a spiritual school and learned how to be a butterfly, oh man, there's a good teacher down there at the HeartLight Spiritual Center. He'll teach you how to live the life of the butterfly as a worm. No. That's not what transfiguration is. It's not a change of mind or consciousness. It is a change of what you are as a species. It is connecting to a different set of DNA blueprints in you that come from above. And to do that, that little worm has to come, first of all, to the end of itself. I feel like I ought to say this. to the end of itself. And the way I see this little worm, I mean, its world is this leaf. It's a huge leaf. I mean, they don't live very long, but they on this leaf, and they just nibble, 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 nibble. And they eat the leaf. They keep eating the leaf, and they're eating their resources. Does that sound familiar? Human beings are eating up their resources. Good air, good water, all the pollution that's going on. There's not much pure organic anything anymore. The ground is not producing healthy food for us because it's so contaminated, right? So we're coming close to the edge of what are we going to do about climate change? What are we going to do about the food situation in the world and all these things? So we're that little caterpillar who's crawled to a point in which it is undone its world. Believe it or not, you've been living on a leaf. You know, you got born, you got into a family, you met somebody, thought you was in love, which is the worst thing you could have done is you fell in love. That's the problem. People tell me they fall in love, I say, I'll be praying for you. Don't fall for anything. Being in love does not mean a fall. Being in love means a rise. If two people come together in love and don't fall in love, right? So all of that kind of stuff is going on. So the little caterpillar is at the edge. How many of you just lately maybe heard yourself say, whoa, I don't know what's going to happen? You know? I know, if you haven't said it, you've thought it. Like, how is this going to work out? You know, politically, economically, in every system of this world, I don't see a great future for it to be successful ever again as it was. But I got to say this, and this is where I think people are missing it, is they want to go back and try to fix the old system to be good like it was as an old system. So they want to go back and say, oh no, you were born a caterpillar, you're going to die a caterpillar, and I'm going to help you how to survive here as a better caterpillar. And therefore, it aborts the inner process that was there all along, and that was another set of DNA to give it a blueprint to evolve itself into the next level of its evolution. And I have to say this about some energetics. I'll probably never stop talking about all this, but that is something I've taught for 23 years, as I know Barbara knows very well, is don't come in here and learn this to try to fix people. There's plenty other modalities. There's tons of them that'll teach you healing for somebody that's broken, which is fine. If I'm broken, fix me. But that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone that can assist me to the next level of my bioconscious evolution. That's why I, in some ways, feel at the end of myself. There's nothing wrong with feeling at the end of yourself. That means you are the little caterpillar that's crawled along, eating your resources, and you can't go back, even though they're yelling, we can go back, make it great again. You get my drift. Huh? You got a whole movement out there that thinks it's all back what it used to be. America, what it used to be. So that's ridiculous. And so we're spending all of our money and efforts trying to fix something that is a natural process of coming to the end of itself. Now, is it going to jump right over to be the next thing? Absolutely not. There's something that is between what ends and what begins. And that's called chaos. Thank you. That's called chaos. I call it a state of confusion. See, I don't see confusion as a bad thing. When I get confused about something, I'm realizing probably that wasn't a truth for me, and I'm on my way to the truth, but I'm confused about it. Look at the word con. What does it mean? With. It's a prefix for with. Confuse is fusion together. Confusion means, okay, I thought this was right. I thought I was going to believe this for the rest of my life and be that caterpillar, but all of a sudden it's just not working for me. And then I go and I hear this crazy guy down there at HeartLight say a bunch of stuff, and I'm now totally confused. I don't know what to believe. Good for you. Yes.
But then doesn't, not to hark on it, but doesn't the Bible say that the author of confusion is the devil?
The Bible says a lot of things I do not agree with. Yeah. I mean, I'm not being picky or trying to justify myself, but I've studied the context of these things. And when that is written, since you brought it up, let me put it in, thing is missing in the Bible is context. And the context was Paul writing to a specific church, I think it's Corinth, who was having issues, fighting and arguing, and they were causing confusion in the church. And he says God is not the author of that kind of confusion, because it's man-made confusion. That's a good point. The confusion I'm talking about is in the process of transformation, of leaving here but not quite arriving here as a new norm yet, and you're in a state of being with fusion, a new mindset. Is that good? You like that? That makes sense to you? So confusion could be chaos, state of crisis, birth pains before the birth, the darkest night before the light, the dark night of the soul. You can call it many things, but I'm here to tell you, and this is the Spirit through me saying to you, you chose to be here for this. You need to hear that. I don't care how bad you think it and how you wish for the old days. That is totally your ego mind filling in blind spots in your consciousness that has not been filled with Christ consciousness. When Christ consciousness fills your mind, you will have such an aha moment that the dots of your life will start connecting, and you'll go, I get it. Now I know what my life has been totally about. And that's when you can be the closest to feeling wholeness in this lower realm. Now I feel whole because I don't have to regret anything. I don't have to be a victim to anything. I realize that I've co-architected and co-created this life that I have lived because I'm giving my Father above a way to do it through me. For it can't feel pain, but it can feel pain through you. That's why Christ needed a body. Not a body, one person, like Christianity wanted to make Jesus the only body that God's coming through. And some other religions have their particular one, their founder, their teacher, that's the one, And so everybody's tried to put it on a body somewhere. But when you start reading about what can embody the Christ consciousness, it takes a collective effort to come together and become many-membered. As a community, stay with me, or what? Ecclesia, or finally ends up as the church. And that's where we get the word church. It's from the Greek word ekklesia, which means a community of people that needs to be built up in the Holy Spirit. You are God's building being built up in the third dimensional world, but you're not just a house being built, you are a temple being built. And that temple shall embody the Holy Spirit in 3D. And this is why you have access to it. So anyway, so I'm not totally through. I've thought of many things. I've thought of starting a small Gnostic class group of students. One, I don't know when to do it. Then I got people saying no because I want to be on it. That's out there, and I would not be able to probably do that. So there's many things up in the air. I'm confused about it, let me put it that way. So until I arrive somewhere of clarity, I'm not sure. But I really think this could be an extensive, for the student who is ready. Not everybody's ready for this or wants this, but if you're a serious student and not just a person who participates at HeartLight on Sunday and Wednesday, but you're actually here and starting to wake up to realize that you came here for God School 101 as a student and not just a mother or a father or a sister or a brother or a cousin or an uncle or all the other things that you've put all your eggs in that basket, which has left you unfulfilled. I'm going to just say it. I don't care how great a family you have. I don't care what great relationship you have with your kids and your grandkids and whatever. There's still going to be something always missing because that's not what you came here for. You came here to go to school to learn so that you can wake up while you're in the body without death. And somebody's going to do that. And that's why it says, if the same Spirit that raised Christ quickened you, your mortal body. So what we're all looking for is a quickening. A quickening. So I just want to, I don't know if it's a warning or what, but I'm getting ready to enter a very serious stage. I just don't want to play any form of church with you. I'll do Sundays. We need Sundays for the public. We need Sundays for the people that are new and whatever. And Wednesday has become a different stage and step of who it's drawn. But I still feel there's one more step in the more serious students that really want to go in a more deeper aspect of things. So we'll just see how that all comes out and how it plays out in that way. So anyway, I just can't get away from that little caterpillar who becomes, I'm totally confused. Can you just a moment be that old caterpillar? What is going on? I don't have any more leaf. Is this the end? Is this what my life has been about? Nothing? To end in a place in which I have no resources? I see nothing. What's going on? Then it feels a little quiver in the core of its soul. Just a quiver. A wave. A wave. Something is happening. I don't know what it is, but something is happening in me that I've never felt before. Something is waking up in me. And that's when what the little caterpillar had in him all along, or her, is awakening, because it's time. It couldn't have happened any other time than this particular time. And even though some of us have tried to push it for decades, I did. I wanted to go right into mortality. I wanted to do this. I wanted to do that. You know, I wanted to jump. I didn't want to go through the confused state. I didn't want to go through the desert, the wilderness, the birth pangs. Just put that baby in my arms. Let it just show up. But it did not happen that way. And it's not ever going to happen that way, because there is an important process to this. And don't take lightly bridging the gap. That is who we're trying to reach. Those who have incarnated in this lifetime to stand in the gap and to make up a bridge crossing a world that is dying and a world that is birthing. And a lot of the one that's dying is dying in you and I. I feel dying in me. And the part of me that feels dying grieves. I got to expose this to you, just to show you how the devil, the enemy, the carnal mind, the ego, I don't care what you call it in your head, works. It's like, let's listen to a bunch of 70s music. And think back when you were in your late 20s and you were down at the disco dancing your heart out, up all night, da-da-da-da-da. Whoa, what a great day that was. Well, it really wasn't. When I was 29, it was not one of the greatest periods of my life, but I think it is now, because the ego edits out whatever's going on that was unpleasant to me and only keeps the fact I was younger, I was stronger, I was better looking, or whatever it is that I think I was at that time. And that's the serpent, that's the whisper. Go back. Go back. Go back. The answer is back. And it takes a real vision and faith to look forward. So, I got 5 minutes here. So the little caterpillar knows that something is happening. But it's just not happening in its mind. This is where I think New Thought and metaphysics has got a little stuck to me, is that they think it's all mind. It's all changing the mind, using thoughts. And as wonderful as that is, oh my God, I'm so thankful for that period of my life when I found teachings of Phil Moore and teachings of Holmes and teachings of metaphysical type people to help me how to use what mind I have a little bit better in some ways to give me a little bit more positive experience than maybe a negative one at times, although it never worked 24 hours a day, I'm sorry. You can't stay in a state of meditation, contemplation, and how you feel at church on Sunday 24 hours a day, because that's just not the way that it happens. So this didn't just happen in his mind, and I'll close with this, but he felt it in his body. All the way to the cellular, molecular structure of what made him a caterpillar is now feeling the wave. The vibration, the frequency. It's a new frequency that's waking up in the caterpillar. Yeah, and it's shaking its life. I thought I had it figured out. I thought I had the retirement figured out. I thought I had enough money for this. I thought I had this. I figured out. I don't know now. I'm feeling shaky about life. Yay! And then, of course, you know what happens. It starts breaking down. We're all the way to the cellular, molecular level of its body. It breaks down into, and this is a scientific term, into goo.
Yeah.
Goo, a pile of goo. But out of that goo, something awakens, which are the first new cells of the butterfly called imaginal cells.
Hallelujah.
Imaginal cells, look it up. It's a scientific term of physics. Imaginal cells. And what that goo starts imagining itself as the next stage of its evolution. And from that, a new blueprint or DNA is set. And the cells start coming together, reading a different blueprint as a butterfly and not the blueprint of becoming another caterpillar. Talk about born again. It's not just a spiritual thing, but it becomes a thing that happens all the way to the cellular level. So I guess what we're trying to say here, if you're feeling like your life's all shook up and things are shaking and you're confused, and this teaching is just making you go, I don't know what I believe anymore. I come and hear him, I don't know what I believe anymore. Good, because then we're tearing down walls of beliefs that, and not all beliefs, but some beliefs are not aligned with your innate intelligence. That's why it's so powerful that it says, you need nothing. You need to learn nothing. There's nothing new under the sun. Everything that you need to know is already in your spirit. But in the density of coming here into the world of Yalaboth, the God of the Old Testament, and with its laws, I tell you, the laws, oh my goodness, I'm feeling it coming on here. The law is the sword of the word. I'm just hearing this. It's the sword of the word. It's sharp as a two-edged sword, it says. It's talking about the letter or the law of the word. It's like a two-sided sword. cutting asunder between what's spirit and what's not. Now, get this. When Christ's seed, that wave in the caterpillar, starts awakening in you, instead of finding a supportive group, a church, or a community to help you form that which is awakening in you, they take the letter of the law and stick it in the womb of your consciousness and aborts Christ becoming born in you and as you to the cellular level.
Tell us.
I don't think I could repeat that. That's abortion. And the watered down is these things are such a issue right now. Abortion and gay issues and all that is because it's something deep in the collective unconsciousness that people do not want to deal with. They want to deal with the blending of male and female like it was when it was created above. Before there was man and woman and Adam and Eve, and there was Lilith, and there was others that were both male and female, both of them. They were androgynous. They didn't need physical sex. Oh, Lord help me to not go into all this today. And the Gnostics will teach us all about that. There's so much it can teach us that it's so rich. And maybe if this is my thing, then I have to come in terms with this is my thing. But if it's our thing together, then we have to look at it, what we want to do with this idea of, and I don't know a better year to do something like this than 2024. To have something to take us out of all of the fighting and the arguing and what's going to be flying around for the next year or so, that we come into our own secret place of the Most High. Yeah. Woo! I like that. Does that make a sense? Secret place of who? El Elyon, not Yahweh. Right. But the Most High, the true spiritual Father of lights, the true spiritual, the entirety, the unnameable, the non-local, who seeks in us that part of itself that is non-local. There's a part of you. And when you get there, I got to say this, and when you get there, it's not going to be the perfect philosophy, theology, or revelation, or perception, or language. You're going to be in the state of, I don't know nothing. And when you're there, you're beholding the face of God, which is silence. When it's all been said and done, and you've gone to the end of your leaf, and said, well, I've heard this, and I followed this, and I thought Course in Miracles was it, and I thought metaphysics was it, and I thought Kabbalah was it, and I've been through all these things, thinking each one of them might be the it, and not that I didn't glean from all of them. I did. I didn't agree with everything they said, and it doesn't mean they were wrong, it just wasn't resonating with me. Doesn't mean something doesn't resonate, it's wrong. So be careful with that here, with all this new stuff coming at HeartLight about being too quick to judge it, right or wrong, good or bad. What do?
We contemplate.
We contemplate. We contemplate, judging it not right, wrong, good, or bad. And we hold it and wait to see that if that particular information is already in us, it'll resonate like unto like. It'll resonate it into our consciousness until it becomes self-knowledge. Not the knowledge of David or the knowledge of Jesus or the knowledge of anybody else out there that you have followed, but it will be coming from the I am that you are. And that's the most powerful knowledge or gnosis that you can have, is the one that comes from the authentic you, the teacher within. All right. Let me say, does it say how long this is?
31 minutes.
So we're going to be real close here. I chose this one today because Judas got a bad rap like Mary Magdalene. She became the prostitute and the whore, and Judas became the betrayer and the bad guy, and that's not true. You'll find out actually he was the closest of the male apostles. She was the closest of all apostles, was Mary Magdalene, but the most male, which is in Christianity supposed to be Peter. Peter was not at all. He was a mess. He was an angry guy who gave Mary a real hard time because Jesus kept going to her instead of him. But it's Judas that even in the Bible is called Jesus' comrade or friend. He didn't call anybody else friend. So this will kind of help you with a lot of things. So enjoy today's lesson. I just think this man does a wonderful job of explaining this, so I want to share this with you today, okay? Good to see you.
She invited me.
Judas. The name itself has come to stand for treachery and betrayal, for the friend who's really an enemy. According to the Gospels of the New Testament, it was Satan who inspired Judas to betray Jesus. And Judas suffered a miserable death, either as a suicide, as in the Gospel of Matthew, or in sudden spontaneous combustion, as in the Acts of the Apostles. Imagine then the surprise of many people when in the spring of 2006, a small group of scholars announced the publication of an ancient Gospel of Judas. The very idea seemed to be an insult to Christianity, a stick in its eye. And yet it really exists. A Gospel of Judas that's not only Christian, but also claims that other Christians are deluded, and it alone has the truth about Jesus and salvation. Many people throughout the world may have found this shocking, but scholars of Gnosticism did not. You might recall that in his writings from around 180, Irenaeus of Lyon claimed that the Gnostics had produced a book called the Gospel of Judas. After describing the teachings of the Gnostics, Irenaeus writes the following. And furthermore, they say, Judas the betrayer was thoroughly acquainted with these things, and he alone was acquainted with the truth as no others were. And so he accomplished the mystery of the betrayal. By him all things, both earthly and heavenly, were thrown into dissolution. And they bring forth a fabricated work to this effect, which they entitle the Gospel of Judas. And that's exactly what we find in the newly discovered Gospel of Judas. Jesus reveals the truth about God, the creation of this world and humanity, and the future to Judas alone. The other disciples of Jesus are clueless. And when Judas hands Jesus over to his enemies for crucifixion, he sets in motion events that will lead to the dissolution of the present world order and its replacement by a new regime. If the secret book according to John presented a new Gnostic version of the Genesis story of creation, then the Gospel of Judas presents a new Gnostic version of the Gospel stories about Jesus. Unlike the Gospels in the New Testament, however, the Gospel of Judas does not tell us much about Jesus' life and ministry. There are no stories of Jesus being born, there are no travels around Galilee, no miracles. The author just says that Jesus performed signs and great wonders for the salvation of humanity. Instead, the Gospel narrates a series of conversations between Jesus and his disciples and between Jesus and Judas. These conversations take place in the days before Jesus' death. During these conversations, Jesus deprecates all the disciples, including Judas, but he never criticizes Judas as harshly as he does the other disciples. None of the other disciples know anything true about Jesus, and Jesus compares them to evil priests who are leading their followers to their deaths. Eventually, Jesus delivers a speech of revelation to Judas, much like the Savior's revelation to John in the secret book according to John. After this revelation, the divine nature of Jesus departs toward heaven on a cloud. leaving only the human Jesus for Judas to betray. Next, the human Jesus is with his disciples in the upper room of some house, presumably sharing the Last Supper. Outside, Judas meets with Jewish leaders, accepts their money, and hands Jesus over to them. Then the gospel ends. The author assumes that the reader knows what happened next. So what's going on here? Why does Jesus criticize the disciples so strongly? What's the revelation that he makes to Judas? And what's Judas's role in salvation? These are the questions at the heart of understanding this Gnostic gospel. But first, let me tell you how the Gospel of Judas was discovered and why it did not become available to people until 2006. The Gospel of Judas was not found at Nag Hammadi. It's contained in another ancient Coptic codex, now known as Codex Chakos. Unfortunately, Codex Chakos has suffered a great deal of damage, much of it after it was discovered. It seems that it was one of 4 codices that some peasants found in the late 1970s in an ancient burial cave, about 35 or 40 miles from the Egyptian town of Al-Minya. Al-Minya is well north of Nag Hammadi, and so it's unlikely that these manuscripts were ever part of the same collection as the Nag Hammadi codices. The other 3 books found in the cave near Al-Minya contain a Greek mathematical text, a copy of the biblical book Exodus in Greek, and a copy of the letters of St. Paul in Coptic. I'm afraid that there are no exciting stories about the discovery of these codices. Instead, it's after the discovery that the tale turns tragic. The codex that contains the Gospel of Judas ended up in the hands of an antiquities dealer. Thanks to the notoriety of the Nag Hammadi codices, this dealer knew he had something special, and so he tried to get people to pay millions of dollars for the codex. Of course, the people and institutions that would want the codex and who would know how to preserve and read it were scholars and universities. They did not have the kind of money that the dealer wanted. But his attempts to get buyers did lead a few scholars to realize that another important Coptic codex had been found. One scholar was allowed to read enough of the codex to see that Judas was an important character in it. But he thought this was the apostle Judas Thomas, not Judas Iscariot. Meanwhile, more than one antiquities dealer entered the picture, and they did not treat the codex well. It spent some 16 years in a safe deposit box in a bank on Long Island in the United States. There, it suffered the damage that comes from humidity and changes in temperature. Another dealer tried to separate the pages of the papyrus by freezing the manuscript and then thawing it, which did terrible harm. There's even evidence that pages in the codex were deliberately rearranged to make it more appealing to buyers. Eventually, and fortunately, the codex ended up in the possession of the Mykonos Foundation for Ancient Art in Switzerland, thanks to the generosity of Frida Nussberger Chakos. She named the codex after her father, Demaratos Chakos, and thus it's named the Chakos Codex. Under the auspices of the Mykonos Foundation, a small team of scholars from Switzerland, Germany, France, and the United States were able to undertake the painstaking work of reconstructing the fragmentary codex and editing and translating its text. In the spring of 2006, they released the results of their labor to the world. Eventually, the codex will be placed in the Coptic Museum in Cairo, joining the Nag Hammadi codices. But the story does not end there. It turns out that one of the dealers kept some fragments, which became available only a few years later. It's likely that still more fragments exist somewhere but have not yet been given to scholars. As of the date of these lectures, just about all of the Gospel of Judas has been reconstructed, but there are still missing pieces. We can only hope that these pieces might surface in the years ahead. When scholars could read the Gospel of Judas, they recognized it as coming from the Gnostics because it matched Irenaeus' description of the Gnostics' Gospel of Judas. The first scene of the Gospel lets us know that we're dealing with a view of God that's similar to that of the secret book according to John, and that we are not dealing with the Christianity of a bishop like Irenaeus. Jesus comes upon the disciples offering thanksgiving over the bread, and he laughs at them. The disciples ask Jesus, "Teacher, why are you laughing at our prayer of thanksgiving? What did we do? This is what's right." And Jesus replies, "I'm not laughing at you. You don't do this by your own will. Rather, by this your God receives praise." Now, the word used for thanksgiving here is Eucharist. So when the disciples are portrayed as saying thanksgiving over the bread, it looks like they are celebrating the Eucharist or Lord's Supper, even though that would be anachronistic because Jesus has not yet instituted the Lord's Supper. In any case, Jesus mocks this ritual as offering praise to what he calls your God. This is the first indication that the Gospel of Judas is Gnostic. It rejects the God that other Christians worship, that is, the God of the Old Testament. Let's remember that the secret book, according to John, calls the God of the Old Testament Yaldabaoth and Saklas, and depicts him as a malicious and false lower divinity. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus' pronouncement that the disciples' God is not his God angers the disciples, and Jesus challenges them. "Let whoever is strong among you people represent the perfect human being and stand before my face." In other words, Jesus wants to know whether any of the disciples belong to the saved people, those who are perfect, and whether any of them can display their gnosis before him. None of the disciples dare to answer Jesus, except for Judas Iscariot. Judas stands before Jesus, albeit with his eyes averted, and says, "I know who you are and where you have come from. You have come from the immortal eon of the Barbelo. But as for the one who sent you, I am not worthy to say his name." This scene is almost certainly modeled after the scene in 3 of the New Testament Gospels, where Jesus asks the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" They give various answers, but only Simon Peter answers properly. "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." This scene establishes Peter as the leader of the disciples. Only he declares Jesus' true identity. Here, however, it's Judas who answers, and he says that Jesus comes from the Barbelo eon. Judas says that he cannot name the one who sent Jesus. Surely this unnameable God is the invisible Virgin Spirit, the ultimate unknowable and unnameable God whom we met in the secret book, according to John. So we see now the basic elements of the myth found in the secret book: the invisible spirit and its first emanation, the Barbelo. But it's Judas who has this knowledge, not John or any of the other disciples. They ignorantly and foolishly worship the creator of this world as the true God. Later in the gospel, when Jesus reveals to Judas the true nature of God and the cosmos, other elements of the Gnostic myth appear, including the self-originate, along with his 4 angelic attendants, and the divine human being, Adamos. There are also numerous references to a great undominated race associated with Seth. The members of this race possess the gift of the Spirit, which will assure them of salvation. There are 2 important ways, however, in which the Gospel of Judas differs from the secret book according to John. First, there's much less interest in female characters, whether divine or human. The Barbelo eon appears only once in Judas's confession of Jesus' true identity, and wisdom or Sophia does not appear at all. Eve is identified as the person through whom all human beings seek God, but otherwise Adam seems to be the major player. Why is the Gospel of Judas more male-focused than the secret book? It's hard to say, but the author may have thought that less emphasis on female characters would appeal to non-Gnostic Christians. In any case, the absence of wisdom leads to the second major difference with the secret book. In the secret book, Yaldabaoth, the ignorant creator of the universe in which we live, came into existence because of wisdom's error. It does not seem to have been God's will that Yaldabaoth exist, although wisdom and the Barbelo quickly worked to bring good out of a bad situation. In the Gospel of Judas, however, Yaldabaoth and his assistant Saklas, these are 2 different beings in this work, come into existence at the initiative of a divine figure, who seems to be a Lelaith, one of the self-originates for attendance. You'll remember that in the secret book, Saklas was another name for Yaldabaoth. Here, Yaldabaoth is a higher ruler than Saklas. Saklas is identified as the god of Genesis, and he's the god that Jews and other Christians mistakenly worship. In the Gospel of Judas, it was the invisible spirit's plan to bring these lower rulers into existence to rule over the chaos of the material world. This, too, may be an attempt to appeal to other Christians. Rather than portraying the invisible spirit of the immortal eons as fallible or as inadvertently creating the lower ruler, this gospel says that God had all this in mind from the beginning, and everything is according to plan. Despite these differences, the secret book according to John and the Gospel of Judas teach the same basic Gnostic myth. They agree that the God of the Old Testament, the God who created this world, is a lower pseudo-divine being. People who worship him as the ultimate God are still asleep or drunk. The true God is the invisible spirit, and his primary emanations are the Barbelo and the self-originate. And so, even though they were found in different locations and are associated with different codices, there's no reason to doubt that both the Gospel of Judas and the secret book according to John come from the same group of Gnostic Christians. Still, as we meet additional Gnostic writings in the next few lectures, we'll find that each author can introduce variations into the basic myth. This suggests that the Gnostics did not treat their myth as a set of unchanging doctrines or as absolute truth. Instead, they approached the myth in a way more like how we think of scientific knowledge. At any given moment, scientists believe that they are offering the best and most probable explanation for what we can observe about the universe. But additional observations and experiments always lead them to make revisions to their basic understanding. And every now and then, someone like Copernicus or Albert Einstein comes along and changes the basic understanding in a revolutionary way. The Gnostics, of course, did not base their myth on scientific observation and experimentation, but on close study of sacred texts and on experiences of revelation. But like a new scientific theory, the Gnostic myth must have been born in some moment of revolutionary new insight, brought about by the experience of Jesus. That new insight included the invisible spirit, the Barbelo, and the true identity of the God of Genesis. The Gnostics, however, did not treat the myth that came from that extraordinary revelation as unchangeable. Instead, further reading in the scriptures and works of philosophy, or new experiences of revelation, could lead them to revise details in the myth. For the Gnostics, true gnosis, true saving knowledge, was ultimately not about knowing the precise details of the myth. Rather, it was about having a personal acquaintance with God, really knowing God in the most direct way possible. Which eon did what and how many rulers Yaldabaoth has were not what's important. What mattered was to know the true God who sent Jesus, the invisible spirit, through the Barbelo. The myth is a means to the ultimate end of gnosis. Now, as Irenaeus said, Judas is the only character in the Gospel of Judas who knows all of this. The other disciples are ignorant. They mistakenly worship Saklas and think that Jesus comes from Saklas. This would seem to indicate that Judas is a privileged character, and if he has the true gnosis, the true knowledge of God and Jesus, then surely he must be a member of the great race that the Gospel says will be saved. This, and some other ambiguous passages in the Gospel, led the first editors to promote it as showing us a good Judas, a Judas who's a hero. But it turns out, especially as new fragments came to light, that Judas's role in the gospel is not so positive. For example, Jesus says to Judas at one point, "I will tell you the mysteries of the kingdom, not so that you will go there, but so that you will be much grieved." That is, Jesus implies that Judas is not a member of the immortal race, not one of the saved people. When passages like this one became clear, some scholars then began to go in the exact opposite direction, and they argued that Judas is a thoroughly negative character, in fact, a tool of Yaldabaoth. According to this view, the Gospel of Judas is not really a gospel, which means good news. Instead, it's a parody of a gospel. It looks like a gospel that brings good news, but it's really bad news. No one in the story is saved. The problem with this view is that such a text would be unprecedented in early Christian literature. When a character receives a revelation from a savior figure, that's always a good thing. The human being who receives the revelation may be flawed or may not understand everything, but he or she is never evil or one of the damned. And so most scholars, including me, tend to see Judas not as evil, but as an ambiguous figure. He's a kind of tragic hero. He plays an essential role in salvation, but one for which he suffers. His ultimate fate may not be to dwell in heaven, but it is an exalted position that gives him great power and authority. On the one hand, this view of Judas is not so different from what we see in the New Testament Gospels. In the New Testament as well, Judas's betrayal of Jesus is required for the salvation of humanity. It's part of God's plan and was predicted in the Old Testament. And yet, the New Testament portrays Judas as an evil betrayer, and he dies for his guilt. So too in this Gnostic gospel, Judas must hand Jesus over, but he suffers for doing so. On the other hand, as we're about to see, the Gospel of Judas gives Judas a much more prominent position in the universe than the New Testament Gospels do. Perhaps the most controversial and crucial moment for understanding Judas of the Gospel of Judas is when Jesus unexpectedly and rather mysteriously addresses him as, "You 13th daimon." What does it mean to call Judas the 13th daimon? In antiquity, the Greek word daimon sometimes functioned as a general term for all divine beings, including gods. More often, however, it referred specifically to divine beings in a kind of intermediate position between full-fledged gods like Apollo and extraordinary divine human beings like Heracles. The term was morally neutral. Daimons could be good or bad, helpful to humans or harmful. In general terms, gods were beings that you would worship, pray to, and offer sacrifices to. Daimons you would deal with or negotiate with through rituals like magical spells. Even more specifically, ancient philosophers often called daimons those divine beings that lived and operated within our universe, within the planetary spheres. Gods, however, dwelled beyond the farthest planetary sphere in their own domain. The gods delegated to daimons the work of running this world, but under their overall supervision. When the Greek word daimon is used in this way, modern scholars translate it into English as God, lowercase g, or as spirit, or just leave it as daimon. In our period, however, Jews and Christians began to use the word daimon in a completely negative sense. For them, angels were the only good intermediate level beings, and a daimon was an evil being, a fallen angel, and thus should be understood in English as a demon. So what's going on in the Gospel of Judas? Unfortunately, the text does not use the term daimon other than in Jesus' address to Judas. But I think it's significant that the Gospel uses the term angel to refer both to undeniably good divine beings, like the self-originate, and to undeniably bad divine beings, like Sacklus and his fellow rulers. So I think what's most likely happening here is that daimon also functions in a somewhat neutral sense. That is, Judas is going to get promoted from being a mere human being to being a divine ruler. In fact, the highest ruler in this universe. The text refers several times to Judas being persecuted by the 12 disciples and by other races of human beings. This certainly refers to the hatred that Judas receives for handing over Jesus. But Jesus also tells Judas that he will eventually rule over all those who persecute him, precisely because he alone knows the full truth about God and Jesus, and because he was willing to perform the act that led to Jesus' saving crucifixion. The Gospel also says more than once that Judas will not enter into the divine realm of heaven. This, of course, sounds very negative, but I think it confirms that Judas will become the highest daimon or divine being in this universe, serving as a kind of administrator for the invisible spirit, the Barbelo, and the other divine beings, just as daimons in the Greco-Roman world did. So I think that the title of this gospel is completely appropriate. This is good news about Judas. He did something for which many people, including most Christians, hate him, but he will ultimately rule this universe as God's representative. So the ultimate message of the Gospel of Judas is a Gnostic vision of future cosmic reorganization, something that Judas helps to set in motion. The divine Jesus tells Judas that Judas will sacrifice the human being in whom Jesus dwells, not the divine Savior himself. This betrayal of a friend remains an evil act, but Jesus says that it will set in motion a series of events that will lead to the dissolution of the current world order and its reestablishment under Judas, the daimon in the highest heaven of our world, the 13th heaven. The current rulers, led by Yaldabaoth and Saklas, will be overthrown. Even the stars that are associated with them will be destroyed. Judas will take their place as ruler of the material cosmos in which we live. The saved people, however, will enter the spiritual kingdom above this world. The gospel calls these people the strong and holy race. This vision has a lot of interesting religious implications, but let's spend the rest of our time looking at just two: the role of the stars and the criticism of the disciples other than Judas and of Christians who follow them. First, the stars. We saw in the secret book according to John that the Gnostics believed that one way Yaldabaoth and the other evil rulers tried to impede our gnosis of God is by controlling our decisions through fate. And that fate can operate specifically through the stars. In some ways, this is basic ancient astrology, which often taught that the stars exert influence on events or even control them. According to the Gnostics, however, the Barbelo has acted through Jesus to free human beings from fate and the stars by means of gnosis. The Gospel of Judas, too, speaks of the stars guiding and leading people. In fact, it talks a lot more about stars than the secret book does. But there does seem to be a difference. The Gospel of Judas does not use the term fate, and it associates specific stars with individual human beings and groups of people. So, for example, Judas has his own star, which can guide him rightly and also lead him astray. So too the other disciples have stars, and certain races of human beings have stars. The way the Gospel of Judas envisions stars appears to be more like ancient Jewish literature, in which the stars are beings like angels or demons. They guide and influence events, but as part of a wider scheme directed by God, and their influence is not as coercive as fate. Think of the star over Bethlehem that leads the wise men to baby Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. That star plays an important role in divine and human affairs, but the wise men did not have to follow the star. They could have chosen to go home. So too, in the Gospel of Judas, stars can guide people rightly and wrongly, but people are free to resist. And the stars are closely linked to the people they guide. And so Jesus tells Judas that at the end of time, your star will rule over the 13th eon, the highest eon in this universe. That is, Judas's star will become more important and powerful than the 12 eons or 12 stars of the zodiac, which it seems are also the 12 stars of the 12 disciples. And that brings us to our final point. As it elevates Judas to the position of future world ruler, the 13th daimon, the Gospel of Judas depicts the other 12 disciples, the original 11 plus Judas's replacement, as ignorant of religious truth. In a strange vision, the disciples see themselves as 12 priests making sacrifices at an altar. There they offer up animals and even human beings to God, just as they engage in a host of other sins and yet treat each other with respect. They do all this in the name of Jesus. When the disciples tell Jesus their vision, he commands them sternly, stop sacrificing animals. That is, stop leading other Christians to their spiritual deaths. Here, the gospel strongly criticizes Christian leaders who claim to be the successors to the apostles, who act as priests, and who celebrate the Eucharist in Jesus' name as a new Christian sacrifice to God. That is, it depicts contemporary bishops and priests as false priests who are worshiping the false God of the Bible and leading their followers to damnation. Of course, Irenaeus was one of these bishops that the Gospel of Judas condemned. This harsh condemnation of other Christian leaders goes along with the differences in the Gnostic myth that we found in this Gospel. On the one hand, the author has toned down the roles of female characters, and he has emphasized that the rulers of this world resulted from a divine plan. Perhaps he hoped that these changes would appeal to other Christians, who may have been put off by female divinities and the idea that the God of the Old Testament is a kind of mistake. On the other hand, the author depicts other Christian priests and bishops as sinful and ignorant, and he condemns the Eucharist as a false sacrifice. So he's basically saying to other Christians, the Gnostic message of Christianity is the correct one. What your bishops and priests are teaching you leads to death. Come over to our views before it's too late. If you don't do so, you will perish forever. Irenaeus, of course, strongly disagreed. According to him, it's the Christians who follow the gospel of Judas who will be damned to hell. The gospel of Judas, Irenaeus said, is not a genuine revelation from Jesus, but a false gospel, fabricated by the Gnostics. We've now looked at two ancient religious texts that came from the Gnostics, the Secret Book according to John and the Gospel of Judas. We know these works are Gnostic thanks to Irenaeus' description of the Gnostic school of thought. But are there other surviving ancient books that came from the Gnostics, ones other than those mentioned by Irenaeus? Yes, there are, and in the next 3 lectures, we will look at some of them, starting with the revelation of Adam and the reality of the rulers.
But there's a reason I don't want you to miss your reactions. One, there was some in there that was familiar to some of us, I think. We were going, yeah. Other things were new to us, I don't know. And some was, I don't know about that. So it brings out different experiences that you get to look at as to why you felt the way you did in some ways. Another reason is, I think, listening to something like this helps you to understand how much more there is to choose from into how that you want to continue your journey toward what you choose to believe and see is much broader than we have thought. I think sometimes we have not understood that even in metaphysical, new thought, new age, whatever you want to call it, that it's still a little in the confinements of a Christianity flow. And even though he uses Christianity when he talks about Gnostics, he's not talking about the Christianity that we know of 315 AD, of the Nicene Council, when Christianity was organized to become Christianity. So as I've told you, that every monotheistic religion has a mystical side to it. You know, Judaism is Kabbalah, Muslim is Sufi, and of course the Christian is more Essene and Gnostic teachings. And the fact that that's been edited out, most of our Christian foundations, which we've all been influenced by at some level, I don't care what level. I don't care if you was raised in a house that was non-religious or atheist. If you live in the West, you are in some way influenced by Christian belief and teaching. It's in our laws, we say it in movies, we quote it. People don't even know they're quoting the Bible half the time because there's verses that have made it into the collective consciousness of the culture. So we're constantly feeding and have that line back to y'all both And when it says Barlow, don't get confused with that. That's just the feminine name of when you say Mother, Father, God. You're talking about the mother is Barlow. So that's the Gnostic term that they call it. And just because we call it Holy Spirit or something else doesn't mean it's anything different. But it's the part of the unseen God that is seen first, which is what creates a womb for other thoughts to be born. Once it had the thought of itself, the Barlow, then she, with a womb, created other thoughts. And those are what we call the thoughts of God, the true thoughts of God. Most of what we do down here are thoughts about God. But from above, we have the thoughts of God that come through us. And that's the difference in people who I hope I represent to some level, who do more channeling the information than trying to follow the outline of it. As you know, I don't do well with outlines and notes and things like that. But sometimes I need them to activate me and help me to get to the point in which I catch the flow. Because the flow of the words that come through me does not stop any. It's always there. It's a continuous flow of information that is always flowing. It's like a river. I jump in the river, and sometimes I have to jump out of the river. But the river is always flowing, and we call that channeling. And I think right now what we need is more channelers who are willing to step aside and not be so strong in what they believe, and this is the way it has to be, to become more open, to allow things to come through our own mouths that challenge us. Don't think things that come out of my mouth don't challenge my belief system. I have the same reactions you do. But I like those reactions. It makes me know I'm alive and that I'm still learning and that I still have options and that I still have choices to make that can continuously change us. And that's the reason that communities like HeartLight have a challenge, because we will never probably settle down into one way of this is what we believe at HeartLight. I do think we have some specific foundational principles, which I'll be talking about the first of the year, which I usually do the first of the year here. I take a little bit of time to go back and just remind us of our foundations of why we come together in the first place. But a foundation is not the house. You got to build on the foundation. And we're here to build the house. And I'll close with this scripture. If we build in vain unless the Lord builds the house. So we're here to be the bricks, but God has the blueprint of how to build this house. We're the lively stones of this house. So yes, I put this on you because you hear a lot of different things, a lot of different ways to think, things that get you out of your comfort of your brain. Because if you keep hearing things you already know, you get really lazy up here. But if you start hearing things you don't know, then you have to wake up a little bit and kind of look at it and observe it and check it out. And that's what I want you to do. Again, I want to make it clear, these teachings are not to convert anybody to any particular belief system. I am not in any way, it is not my intention to change any of you to believe something I believe so that I can feel better about what I believe. We're here to learn together. We're here to explore together. We're on a great adventure here at HeartLight. I want you to see this as an adventure. When I come on Sunday morning, what kind of adventure, where's this adventure going to take us today? You know? And I think we need more of that openness for the adventure to take place in us. Yes, Dolores, and I'll let you all go real quick here.
I've heard you mention a number of paths that you studied and looked at. Have you ever studied the I Am discourses?
I'm familiar with it, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I might have some questions
I've
about
dabbled.
them later, but I just wanted to know.
Yeah, I don't remember what my thing was, but at the time I stuck my toe in the water. And, again, I don't experience things, go, oh, I don't like that, I don't believe that, whatever, I just put it aside and wait, and sometimes it comes back around. And that does all the time. Books fall out of my bookshelf, I haven't looked at them in
Right.
20 years. You know, I've had that happen so many times, and 20 years ago, I wouldn't have had it. No way. All right, thank you, you're good sports, you can do this.
Thank you.
Take what you got and put the rest on the shelf, and let's move on a little bit. Well, I want to talk about Mary Magdalene next Wednesday. If we can
Okay.
look at her. You know, the sale of our business has happened. So HeartLight, please step up and support. So Wednesday is very important to me to continue doing what we're doing in Sundays also. So, everybody given?
When you talked about being in the flow, it reminded me of Finding Nemo. Remember the current?